All right, so let's just get started here. This is an observance of Workers' Memorial Day, an international event that happens on April 28th, and we have traditionally held it on Friday morning prior to that so that we could have a breakfast event. And so I kept it at that time and day, and we moved online due to this coronavirus pandemic. And I really appreciate all of you for getting here and getting yourselves situated so you can join us for this. I did not want to let it go unobserved. Workers are dying all the time, and we wanted to, whether there's a pandemic or not. So, and especially at this time. So thank you again. Wendy is going to be next, and she's going to take it from here.
Good morning, everybody, on this somber occasion. My name is Wendy Clucci. I work for the Area Labor Federation, AFL-CIO. We're a labor organization representing 11 counties, about 200 different unions, and 100,000 workers and their families. Anne Marie Talercio from Unite Here 150 is our president, and she's also among us here this morning. We'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of labor and welcome our elected officials that may have joined us. I'd like to read a brief statement from the president of the National AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, about labor in Memorial Day, in Workers' Memorial Day. Today we observe Workers' Memorial Day to remember workers killed or injured on the job and to renew the fight for strong safety and health protections. The Occupational Safety and Health Act and Mine Safety and Health Act promise workers the right to a safe job. Unions and our allies have fought hard to make the promise a reality, winning protections that have made jobs safer and saved lives. After years of struggle, we won new rules to protect workers from deadly silica dust and beryllium, a stronger coal dust standard for miners, and stronger anti-retaliation protections for workers who report job injuries. Our nation is currently facing a public health crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As the virus continues to spread, many employers are woefully unprepared. Guidance from federal authorities has been inconsistent at best and dangerous at worst. OSHA is making progress on a permanent infectious disease workplace standard that would have provided employers both the tools and the mandate to protect workers from infection. However, as part of this administration's pattern of reckless and dangerous deregulations, President Trump halted that effort once taking office. The labor movement has trained, educated, and equipped our members with the tools they need to be safe on the job for decades. We are demanding the federal government provide protective guidance instead of bad advice that leaves workers at risk. Working people are doing our part in the face of COVID-19 outbreak. Now our government must do the same by issuing strong, enforceable protections for all workers at risk during this pandemic. This year's theme of Workers' Memorial Day is Protect Our Rights, Speak Up for Safe Jobs. During this national crisis, it is even more important that we stand together against the ongoing attack on workers' rights and protections. Every worker has the right to a safe workplace. When workers are punished for speaking up against unsafe working conditions, everyone's safety is at risk. A climate of fear impacts everyone's lives at work. We urge you to get involved in organized actions, activities, observances, or digital campaigns in your workplaces and communities to highlight the toll of job injuries and deaths and call for action to protect our right to a safe job. We will stand united against the ongoing attacks on workers' rights and protections, and every worker must be protected to speak up when elected officials put corporate interest above workers' well-being. We must and will protect the right of every worker to a safe job and fight until the promise is fulfilled.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much. You remind me that I probably should make basics formal introduction. I'm Jeanette Zeckler. I direct preventive services here at the Occupational Health Clinical Center. I'm your MC for today, and this event has been brought together by 5 organizations: the Occupational Health Clinical Center, the Greater Syracuse Labor Council, the Area Labor Federation, the ALF, and the Greater Syracuse Council on Occupational Safety and Health, the COSH, Greater Syracuse COSH, and the Workers Center of Central New York. These 5 organizations have been working on Workers' Memorial Day for maybe 10 years. I can't remember if it's 9 or 11 years. So this we've been doing for a while together as a move of unity across unions, across advocacy groups, across everyone to work against the workers' health assaults that we see every day. So, having introduced us, the next person to speak is going to be the new executive director of the Worker Center of Central New York, and we welcome Jessica Maxwell.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to everybody who helped to pull this event together under our circumstances. I just stepped into the executive director position at the Worker Center less than 2 weeks ago. It's a pretty crazy time to jump into organizing for workers' rights, and there's no place that I would rather be right now than working with all of you on that. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Worker Center, we're a grassroots organization with a focus on workplace organizing and economic justice. We're part of a national network of worker centers affiliated with the Chicago-based Interfaith Worker Justice. We build power among low-wage and immigrant workers primarily, including farm workers and restaurant workers. We provide trainings related to workers' rights and occupational health and safety, developing leadership through participation in campaigns on the ground, fighting for policy changes to promote human rights, not just worker rights, and higher workplace standards. Really, at the end of the day, we're fighting to shift the balance of power in the favor of workers. This is just an enormous challenge right now for all of us. And it's also an enormous privilege to be doing this work at a time when it's so desperately needed. And we have such a potential to make major shifts right now and major gains for workers when they're really under the gun. Right now, we have an estimated 6 million undocumented immigrant workers risking their lives in essential jobs on the front lines in healthcare, grocery stores, on farms. We have another 6 million undocumented workers in sectors that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. Immigrants are here working to take care of themselves and their families with all the same fears and all the same questions that all of us have at this time, and yet they're being excluded from the supports and protections available to other members of our community, which, as we know, aren't even enough for workers who are citizens. The first death in Cayuga County due to COVID-19 was a farm worker. Many more are still in quarantine there, as we're seeing the repercussions of gaps in worker protections for farm workers, including delays in providing basic information about coronavirus. We were getting calls from people on farms in the area who didn't even know there was something going on or something that they needed to take precautions about. Failure to provide adequate personal protective equipment, and a lack of state guidance on protocols for agricultural work during this pandemic when people are being told to continue operating. We see employers who want to keep up appearances for the sake of public relations, giving lip service to state guidance while they fight any kind of regulation or enforcement because they don't want workers to have that power, because they understand what's at stake. And we know we can't rely on benevolent employers and acts of charity to protect workers. It's just not good enough. It never has been. And now is the time, more than ever, to fight to change the system that left workers exposed and unprotected in the face of a global pandemic. What we have refocused to is immediate support for workers on the ground, as well as fighting for the long-term change that we need. Last year, the Worker Center and our members and statewide allies won the right for all New Yorkers to apply for and obtain a driver's license regardless of their immigration status. We know that for rural workers, driver's licenses are a basic necessity to get to and from work without risking a law enforcement encounter and putting their liberty on the line, as well as for access to basic services such as healthcare. We also, with the help of allies and members, won a historic victory last year, guaranteeing farm workers the right to organize in New York State. And we are so gonna need that right this year. A friend recently told me we're facing all the same old stuff, just in a new context. And that's really been ringing true for me. We know this fight. We have been in this fight, and the stakes have just never been clearer. But right now, the public is starting to understand too, and starting to see that profound truth and that old labor saying, an injury to one is an injury to all. I don't know if we've ever lived through a time when that saying held more meaning than it does right now. and public sentiment is on our side. Workers' rights have never been more centered in the media, and we have got to figure out how to translate that into victories on the ground for workers that will outlast this crisis that we're in right now. We've joined with statewide allies right now to push the governor's office to guarantee better protections for farm workers, access to testing, which we know in the rural areas is not easy, providing clear and consistent guidance for best practices in agricultural work specifically, and providing enforcement mechanisms so we can have accountability to ensure that people are receiving the protection that they need right now. Like, if we can fine individuals on the street for not wearing a mask, then certainly we can figure out how to hold accountable employers who are responsible for the health and safety of hundreds of workers. We have also stepped up to meet the immediate needs that we're seeing to provide direct assistance to those who are directly affected and don't have access to some of the benefits right now that are being offered to others. We're helping the staff an all-volunteer phone line with bilingual assistance, Spanish and English, to answer questions and provide service referrals to people who are in need right now. In conjunction with the Syracuse Immigrant and Refugee Defense Network, we're responding to emergency requests from undocumented workers for grocery deliveries, infant care items, deliveries of masks and hand sanitizer, because even as we fight for there to be provision from employers, we can't wait to win that victory. We got to do it ourselves on the ground while we fight the long battle. We're also offering a weekly series of Facebook Live events at the Worker Center Facebook site. I'm going to put a file up in the chat when I finish speaking to share that out to folks. The one that we're doing tonight, we're doing them every Friday night at 7:30 so that we can catch workers coming off shift from farms. And they're focused on answering questions related to the COVID crisis. Tonight, we're going to have lawyers from the Volunteer Lawyers Project in Onondaga County, Hiscox Legal Aid, and Legal Services of CNY, providing information and answering questions in English and Spanish about immigrant rights, worker rights, evictions, and other issues that are of concern to immigrants and low-wage workers now. Kind of sort of unusual request at the end, because this is a labor rally, and one of the things we do to build morale with our workers is a little chant. And I'm wondering if it's possible for us all to unmute and do a little chant together. Is that too much right now? All right, so I will do it just a couple of times. You guys join in. If you're not familiar with this one, it's Yes We Can. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede.
For all workers.
Thank you guys for doing that. It's so good to see you guys. We are so glad we're in it to win it, and we are so glad to be in it with you. Thank you all for being here this morning.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica, for doing a chant in Zoom. That's the first, probably, for many of us. Great. Thank you so much for all that good information. All the strength in your voice really shows, you know, there's going to be a good way forward at the Worker Center. We're glad about that. So next, we have a bit of an interruption in our planned program here, because we'll hear from Anne Marie Talaricio, who is going to give us a very quick update on the Hazard Abatement Board news. So take it away, Anne Marie.
Yes, just a quick update, because I know many of you depend on Hazard Abatement Board. We met via phone conference, the three of us, and we discussed the grants. We came up with awards, and where we are right now is the meeting was supposed to be April 15th to grant the awards, to vote on the awards, but due to the Department of Labor workers being whatever the word is, taken over to unemployment insurance, we weren't able to process it. But there is going to be an online meeting, a public online meeting to vote on the awards. The hope was to do it by the end of April, but they're still at UI. So we just got word yesterday that they will probably, we're shooting now for the beginning to mid-May. But as of now, you know, because we do also worry about, I don't want to say it out loud, but the money. Right now, everything's slated to go through as usual. And I just want to give everybody that update because I know a lot of you depend on that money for next year. And you can ask me questions offline. I'll you know, you could all email me or text me. I'll answer your questions that way.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you so much, Anne Marie, for giving us that quick update. And I think that there's a couple of things that people are bringing to my attention. Certainly Workers' Memorial Day is an international tradition that has been going on in this community for longer than 25 years. I didn't mean to suggest it wasn't. In this breakfast format, we've been doing it with this coalition for maybe 10 years. So definitely want to make sure people understand the long-term nature of the tradition and not just that only a decade is not that much. So for sure, thanks for that. Also, it's important for all of us to notice that this meeting is being recorded, and so we will have a record of things that were said and happened here. So everyone should know that. All right, so we need to keep things moving. I'm definitely noticing the comments in the chat. It's a bit much to make all the adjustments that people are requesting, but I will try as I can. So what's next on tap here is for Deborah Gonzalez of the Greater Syracuse Kosh to speak about her contribution of this painting, which is in a series of many paintings that she does every year for us. So thank you, Deborah, and take it away.
First of all, good morning, everybody. It's always a great privilege to be here at Workers' Memorial Day as a working group. I can only tell you that as a group member, we collaborated all the time with what our theme was going to be or what we should do on a painting or what to capture. If there's never been a more important time, it is now about unity. And as we discussed about unity, we captured our unions, we captured organizations, nonprofits, we captured the attorneys, everybody that we feel that we have worked with across our great state of New York. So I just want to say it's always a pleasure doing it every year. And these are trying times, and I think that I've never seen so much outpour for unionism, watching it on the news and seeing the events take place now. So thanks everybody to enjoy the painting and I can't say it enough. It's just been a pleasure. I can't say any more than that.
All right, thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much for your efforts. Yes, we could unmute for a second and just do actual prepping. So much work.
Stuff like that. Not really.
No, not really. I wish.
And so, thank you so much. I think that the painting was inspired by last year's theme of solidarity among so many organizations who work hard on behalf of workers. So thanks again. We're going to move now into the portion of our program that is about the awards. Awards we give for a variety of reasons, and the main reason is because of the achievements of the people that were getting the awards. They're unique, and part of my driving force for wanting to hold this is to recognize that these are worthy folks who really deserve these awards, and so I didn't want them to go unrecognized without, you know, even though we couldn't convene in the breakfast. So the thing is, the first award is in honor of Bob Tompkins for Lifetime Achievement. And Bob Tompkins was a very energetic individual that was a social activist who impacted just, you know, far and wide around the community. Many knew and loved him, and we name the award every year. He was our board chair for 15 years at the clinic and held many other hats in the community. And so the first award today is in his honor. So the award is going to our own Greg Sawinski. And Michael, I think you have some introductory comment first.
Yes, thank you. I'm Michael Lax. I'm the medical director of the Occupational Health Clinical Center. And I've known Greg for about 30 years, since he came to work as the industrial hygienist at the Occupational Health Clinical Center. And I also knew Bob Tompkins, and he was a good friend of both Greg and I. And so I could say a lot about Greg, and probably much of it he wouldn't want me to mention on this in this venue. So I'm just going to say three things as introduction. When we hired Greg, one of the reasons we hired him was because he was an industrial hygienist who was different. And the way he was different was that he was pretty much a pioneer in the field of industrial hygiene, and sort of taking a path that was different from the path of many of his colleagues, which was called at the time Industrial Hygiene to Win. And the Industrial Hygiene to Win was based on not taking samples just to make sure that employers were complying with standards, because most of those standards, a lot of those standards were old, they were outmoded, they don't tell part of the picture, or there was no air standard to go with. So you had to find other ways of evaluating workplaces besides just this sort of taking air samples. And that was one of the things that Greg took from his job in New Jersey when he came, and then he has applied it ever since to great effect for our patients, for unions, and making changes that would not have happened if he had pursued the sort of traditional approach. Sort of in conjunction with that, Greg has always been, I think, quite, besides the IH to Win approach, he's been someone who's very creative in his thinking, creative in the way he approaches problems, a very DIY kind of ethic. I remember we had a situation where we were invited into a big plant down in the southern tier, and the union invited us in. Management invited their industrial hygienist in also, to make sure that they were in on the picture as well. And Greg, I think, surprised the other hygienists, because Greg was climbing into the ductwork, going on the roof, going everywhere to try and figure out what the problem was, whereas the company Industrial Hygiene didn't seem too anxious to really get his shoes very dusty. So I think that that's been also important for getting to the root of a lot of problems. And I think that as the last thing I want to say before turning it over to Greg is that sort of underlying all this is a commitment to workers and to worker health. And, that sounds really like not like, well, why not, or why shouldn't that be? But the reality is that for many who work in my field of occupational health, whether as a physician, whether as a hygienist, their orientation is really not towards commitment to workers, it's really commitment to employers. And so having a commitment to workers and an underlying spirit that really animates the work and directs the work towards working with workers, towards collaborating with workers, towards recognizing that workers themselves know much about their work and have a lot to contribute in terms of figuring out solutions to safety and health problems, I think is really fundamental to what makes Greg's work, has made Greg's work so valuable to so many workers and unions around here, and has been a real contribution to the issue and the identification and the prevention of occupational disease in our region. So we're glad to give this award to Greg, and with that, I'll turn it over to him.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. You brought back some fond memories. So everyone can hear me, correct? Yep. Okay, so first and foremost, I'd like to address, hopefully, not a controversial issue, but I use this 5-cent dust mask with the SOS sign on it, not as a little flippant gesture, but it really is meaningful. And I've been a avid boat person, and when someone gives the SOS, that is a crucial message that all comes to assist us. And the purpose of that was to really emphasize the situation we're all in. And it's basically all hands on deck for everyone, not just for the corona crisis, but the political crisis and all the other issues we're all facing. So let me push on here. I wanted to basically spend just a few moments to talk about this guy, Bob Tompkins, and what he meant to me. And you see in front of you, actually Bob Tompkins. Bob was up for anything, and so was I at that time. He took me out to picket lines. He drove me all through central New York to labor council meetings and to local meetings in the middle of the night. And it was quite an introduction to the sense of unionism and its strength to organize people around their issues, and this one being health and safety. He taught me a lot about human beings and how they respond and how we need to respond to people in need. And so I'm really honored to accept this award. And he was also up for modeling some sophisticated respiratory protection. Bob was advanced in his time, but this is the famous N95 mask that everyone is clamoring for. And he knew that was going to be an issue, I guess, down the road. So I thought, 43 years of doing this work, I wonder if people wonder what motivates someone to do this. And so I just had jotted down a couple of points I'm going to share with you. When I was about 5 years old, my mom brought me in from playing, and she brought me up to an old friend of hers, and she rolled up her sleeve and took this finger and moved it across the serial numbers on this woman's forearm. And being 5 years old, I didn't really know what that meant. And she said, never forget this, because this is a reminder of how some human beings can be evil. And I went back to playing, never really figuring that out until maybe I was a teenager. But it really brought a sense of justice and preparedness for a world that sometimes can be pretty challenging. Another example or motivation happened when I was confronted by a lot of employers and doctors and scientists and peers during my early work and challenging me about my findings and would tell me, Greg, all your measurements are always higher than everybody else's. And all your observations are out of whack with everybody else's. And the intent was to influence my science and my findings. And that happened early on. I'm glad it did, because it really emphasized that science alone is not a solution. There's a political component to all factors of life, and science isn't independent. And so it really emphasized to me that manipulation and influence can really be damaging. And we see that today in this world, not from climate change, but also from health and safety and OSHA regulations. Another example was I was in an asbestos breakthrough plant in New Jersey a long time ago, and it was a big deal. We had federal marshals to open the plant up because the employer was not very nice. And there was this older fellow, his name was Jose, and he was sweeping up raw asbestos on the floor with a push broom. It was about an inch or so thick. And I was in a moon suit, very sophisticated breathing apparatus, and he had a paper dust mask on. And he walked up to me and he said, God bless America, God bless America, God bless America, but why do I wear this mask and you have that on? And it brought tears to my eyes as I tried to answer this guy. And it really motivated me about class struggle in the fight that happens every single day in the workplace. And one more example, and this is, hopefully I keep my wits about me. Back in 2007, I had another motivation, and that was not Bob Tompkins, but, oh, how do I do this? Oh, there we go. These two people entered my life. In 2007, I was diagnosed with leukemia, more likely than not caused by my work conditions, exposed to benzene at US Steel. And these two girls, my daughters, motivated me to get back in the saddle and continue the fight. So I think I'd like to close that we are all in this together. And as someone mentioned earlier, an injury to one is an injury to all. And let's keep moving this game forward. Thank you.
This is high tech. I can't really do it, but we wish we could.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, so much. Next, we'll keep moving to the Friend of Immigrants Award, which is being given to Caroline Kim Tihani. And she'll be introduced by Allie Wayne. Go ahead, Allie.
Okay, so I was only given maybe a minute or two to talk about my good friend, Caroline, which is not enough and it's just adequate at the same time. I know a bunch of you. I'm an undocumented organizer and activist, and I mostly, I think I first met Caroline around the beginning of the Obama administration when a whole bunch of folks here locally in Syracuse were being rounded up. They were undocumented immigrants, were being rounded up by Border Patrol and ICE agents. And it was a really brutal time. And a bunch of us got together and formed an anti-deportation group called the Detention Task Force, in which we found people in detention, got them out of detention and worked against their deportation. And it was a really, really brutal process. And, I'm here to say that Caroline was someone you could always rely on to do the big work and to do the small work without hesitation. I honestly think of her as one of this area's unsung heroes. In fact, when I heard that she got an award, literally, I thought to myself, like, what took you so long, Syracuse, to recognize that we have such a star, in our community? We are in this time of crisis, against all people, all workers right now. And I'm reminded of that simple quote from Fred Rogers about, look to the helpers in times of crisis. And when I think of the helpers in the community, I think of Caroline Kim. And the thing that's amazing about her is that I don't know if I could pinpoint one amazing, grandiose thing that she does. And yet at the same time, I could spend a tremendous amount of time sharing with you all of the small things that she does in the background that make it easier for immigrants and workers alike to be able to resist. When I think of what it means to be an ally, I literally think of Caroline Kim. Over the years, I've been blessed to know many people who have become, in certain ways, people you would consider movement celebrities, who have, big gigs in universities or who appear on MSNBC and who have these big contracts. I can honestly say that I'm prouder of my friendship with Caroline Kim than I am with, some of these folks who are bigger names, because she is an extraordinary individual. And as soon as I heard that she was getting this award, I was so excited to be able to share, my love of her with you all. And I'm so glad that you're getting this recognition, Caroline. I'm so proud of you. I love you. And, we need people like you. And I know that you are someone that we can always rely on. So love you very much, Caroline.
Thank you, Ali. Go ahead, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Ali. It's an honor to be here with you all. I was just noticing this is the first time I've been in a Zoom meeting in my study, and I think it was meant to be because there's I noticed that right over my shoulder there's a picture of my husband's uncle, Joseph Buzdegani. He was a talented violinist and coal miner who lost his arm and then his life in a coal mine in Hungary at age 28. So it's, I get nervous talking in public, and it's comforting and inspiring to have Joseph over my shoulder. My earliest understanding of immigration was deeply connected to my father's journey. He was born a Korean refugee in China, and then was a refugee again in Korea when North Korean soldiers invaded the South in June of 1950. He endured hunger and trauma, and worst of all, lost 2 brothers and his uncle who were kidnapped by the invading soldiers. He came to the United States at age 16 and has just retired at age 82 after working as a doctor at St. Elizabeth and Faxton hospitals in Utica for over 45 years. I think thinking about my father's story had always given me an added level of, I don't know if it's awareness, but just the stories that are behind people's immigration paths. Immigrant workers, both undocumented and documented, risk their lives every day on farms and dairies, meatpacking plants, construction sites, and as direct care workers in hospitals and nursing homes. My first experience with meeting workers who had been injured on the job was in October 2005, when a group of 9 Mexican and Guatemalan workers on DeMarco Farms in Phoenix, New York, were injured in a gas explosion. Their stove was leaking gas in the house on the farm where they were working. And overnight, the house filled with gas. And when one of the workers went to light the stove in the morning, the house blew up. One young man was killed, and another was paralyzed from the waist down. Many had horrible burn injuries and fractures. I heard about the accident and went to the hospital to volunteer with them as an interpreter, and then soon as a friend. The survivors had a long road to even partial recovery. But by the next summer, several of them and their close friends had been arrested and detained by Border Patrol. 3 of them as they walked down the street from church near the house that they were renting in Fulton. 2 of them were arrested by a state trooper at the Carrier Circle Rotary on their way to an appointment at the Occupational Health Clinical Center, where they were being treated in the aftermath of their injuries. And as their friends and relatives tried to get the money together to help with bail, I was shocked to learn that as a detained immigrant, unlike a defendant in a criminal case, you do not have the right to a lawyer. You can hire one if you can figure out how to contact one while you're detained, or if you can find a pro bono attorney willing to represent you. Yet at your immigration court appearance, there's always a prosecuting attorney for the government. And the immigration judge is from the Department of Justice and also representing the side of the government. Until I witnessed this, I had no idea that this was happening. If you're able to get bailed out quickly enough so that you don't get deported, then you have to go to immigration court in Buffalo. And after several trips, the most that the majority of undocumented workers can hope for is to be granted voluntary departure, which allows them to leave the United States on their own and possibly have their bail money returned to them. And the bails, which were bad enough 10 years ago when they were an average 5,000, maybe 7,000 for people from Mexico and Central America, are now apparently $14,000 to $20,000. As a volunteer with the detention task force of the Workers Center, I and others over the years since that time accompanied some of these workers through the bail and court process. Every day, immigrant workers are deprived of their freedom, their homes, their property, and their families with no attorney to represent them. Some asylum seekers have lost their lives when they're deported back to a dangerous situation in their country of origin. So I'm very honored to accept this award, and I would like to accept it in honor of my friend, Victor Torres. He was the head worker on an onion farm in Oswego, where he was arrested and detained by Border Patrol. He's the father of 3 American citizen children and husband of an American citizen wife, who after detention in Batavia, getting bailed out, going to court, finding an attorney to work with him, and fighting deportation for 4 years, was torn from his weeping family and deported to Mexico, where he has since died far from his children. Victor was good and kind and decent and brave, and nothing can bring him back. But I hope with all my heart that we can continue to fight so that this country will stop destroying other equally beautiful and loving families. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. We kind of have no words, at this moment, but I would like to let everyone know that some people have been putting beautiful congratulations in the chat, and I would encourage anyone to go ahead and do that. The chat will be collected, and we will have a record of people's comments on the congratulatory remarks. So that's just another feature of this meeting. Thank you, Caroline, for sharing those thoughts with us. And next, we're going to move to the next award, which is Courage in the Face of Tragedy. We have an award for Nancy Chappell. Gonzalez recommended this person to us, and we'll introduce her next.
I would like to introduce an incredible person that I had the privilege of meeting over 10 years ago. Nancy has been a wonderful instructor. Her students are phenomenal. It makes my job so easy when I come in there and do a presentation on safety. But I can only say that she's an incredible person that I enjoy working with. Out of all the circumstances, I adore her. I think, Nancy, I'm so happy for you today getting this award. I think I love the fact that you're fighting for everything that you're putting on the line for your son. So I'm going to let you explain what you're doing, making changes. I'm just thankful to be your friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Deb, and thanks, everyone. Like many of you, I have worn many hats in my life. I'm a wife of 33 years. caregiver for my husband, who has had multiple sclerosis for the past 21 years and requires constant care. I'm a proud grandmother of 3 wonderful grandchildren. I've been in the dental field for over 30 years as an assistant, as a sales rep, and a teacher of dental assisting at OCM BOCES for 15 of those years. My favorite hat has always been that I'm a proud mother of 2 amazing men. My youngest, Christopher, he's a father of a very active 5-year-old. He served 4 years in the US Army with a tour in Afghanistan and has since joined the Army Reserves. He's recently returned from a 1-year deployment in Djibouti, Africa. My older son, Stephen, has 2 beautiful children, ages 11 and 15, that he had custody of and was raising them as a single father. Steve has been my rock with helping me care for my husband, helping me juggle everything needed to be a caregiver while working full-time. Steve's passion for cooking has always been amazing. He would flip his cap around, which meant he was getting into chef mode, and then he and I would run my kitchen. His sense of humor was out of this world, and he was a very, very funny man. He was always making me and everyone around him laugh. Steve was the kitchen manager at Chili's in DeWitt. On the night of September 14th, 2018, he had the night off, but he covered someone else's shift because that's the man he was. Steve and 3 of his coworkers, they were closing for the night and they were just about to leave around 1 a.m. when someone came in the back door with a makeshift mask and a gun. The gunman called them by name and demanded that Steve open that safe and give him all the money in there. It was just $875. Steve and one of his best friends, Chris Hicks, were executed that night by William Wood. He also tried to kill Jessica Sam, but when he placed the gun in the nape of her neck and pulled the trigger, it jammed. At that point, the 4th worker ran, and so did Wood. Jessica is my hero. She was instrumental in helping the police catch all 5 people involved, all who are now serving their time in prison. The only case we have left is the federal death penalty case for William Wood. The last year and a half have been horrific, to say the least. My son Christopher was deployed when this happened, and he still chose to serve his country and left for Djibouti, Africa, only 2 weeks after the murder of his only brother and his best friend. I spent my days talking to lawyers to gain custody of my grandchildren, as well as closing out all of Steve's accounts, finalizing all of his affairs, clearing out the house that he shared with his brother, as well as working with the district attorney's office. I did not have any time to grieve for my son. I was also fired from my job, which totally blindsided me. I lost my job the day before William Wood pleaded guilty to all 10 counts of robbery and murder. If all this wasn't enough, I assumed that Chili's would be by our side during all of this. I was wrong. They did pay for the memorial service, but that was about it. The only thing I asked of them was to cover the children's medical insurance so that they would be covered until they were of age or out of school, and they said they couldn't do it. We didn't even get a Christmas card from them that year, and we really haven't had contact with them since. Steve loved his job. He was in line to get his own restaurant. He had been offered a week or so beforehand he was murdered. He was dedicated, responsible, and a caring kitchen manager. He had requested that the door to the cage area be fixed. He had been asking for that to happen for over a year, but it was never in the budget. I heard from some of the employees that this has been broken for over 5 years. This is where Wood got into the restaurant. He knew it was an easy way in because he used to work there. They all knew how to get in through the cage. The door had been broken for a while. The only thing that was really ever in the budget from what I heard was the landscaping. The exterior of the appearance of the restaurant seemed to be way more important than the safety of their workers. They didn't have any cameras inside or out, even though many of the employees' cars had been broken into during that past year. The restaurant backs up to a wooded area. There's no protocol in place for the employees to safely leave the building. After the murders, we found out that the restaurant had panic buttons throughout. Nobody was ever trained because nobody even knew they existed. There was one in the office. It was near the ceiling above the safe. That's where my son was murdered. Chili's opened for business 2 days later, would not allow any photos to be displayed of the boys. We all feel abandoned by Chili's. My grandchildren, my family, the Hicks family, Jessica and her family. This was clearly just a cost of doing business to them. Our boys were swept under the rug, and the restaurant quickly turned to business as usual with no more thought about the victims or their families. And after many conversations with the Chili's staff, I kept thinking, what if? What if? What if they had more training? Is there any kind of technology out there that could have helped them? Why were they not trained to handle situations like this? What can we do to make sure this doesn't ever happen to anyone else in the industry? My son Christopher and I have had many years of training in martial arts, and personal awareness and safety is part of our core. I strongly believe that this is the direction Steve would want us to go in and to help people who are in the business that he genuinely loves so much. With all this weighing on us, we need to move forward. As we approach the 1-year anniversary, we felt the need to have these amazing men remembered. Their deaths have affected so many in our industry. We came up with the idea of a community dine out. With only 5 weeks until the anniversary, we had to act quick. So 2 Chefs from Above was created. We have asked some of our local restaurants to donate some of their profits from sales on September 15th, 2019. The response was overwhelming, and we had 14 local restaurants participate. Unexpected donations were coming in as well. We raised over $4,000. Our mission was to raise money for John Tomino and his nonprofit In My Father's Kitchen that feeds our local homeless, and also to create a financial award for OCM BOCES culinary student. With other side events held by many wonderful local businesses, we had a grand total of $6,000. Not bad for our first year with only 5 weeks worth of planning. We want to share our boys' love for cooking and to keep them feeding our community from above. As of earlier this month, I have met with a lawyer and we are officially making 2 Chefs from Above a not-for-profit. Our goal is to develop a training certification to teach restaurant employees and their employers about awareness and safety in their workplace. We'll continue to award culinary students to help them advance in a career that our boys so loved so passionately. We'll not let the senseless murder of Steve Goodconnect and Chris Hicks be forgotten, because they will continue to feed Syracuse as our 2 Chefs from Above. Thank you so much for this award. I'm humbled and honored.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much for coming and sharing such a personal story and getting through it. Really appreciate you. Every year we face these strong emotions, and at this point, we'll just continue now with commemorating the deaths of workers. So hold on for a second. I chose this Diego Rivera painting because it really shows the community together, working together, wide variety of vibrant set of activities. This painting appears on the wall in Mexico. And there's our own painting from Deborah Gonzalez. It's worth noting, and every year we try to bring this up, that occupational disease mortality is estimated to be 6 to 10 times higher than fatalities from injuries. And conservatively, if we were going to track those deaths, we would be reading 180 to 300 more names today than we're going to read. And now we have a big problem on our hands. And so I have a couple of poems for you before we start this. This one is about a nurse, a dedicated nurse. Am I gonna die, you cry? Most people would be speechless, but I can tell you this. I know your nurse, and she don't quit. She'll fight for you with all she's got. She's armed with ruthless determination, so you don't give up hope. Fight like you've never fought before. I cannot promise you they'll find a cure. I cannot promise it won't get worse, but I'll say this and mark my words. She will fight as if you were her kin. She will fight. Do not give in. She will fight until no one is sick. She will fight. She was born for this. A young nurse just out of nursing school, Portland, Oregon. This is another poem. I think it will end up being famous. It's really a nurse at the end of his shift after having experienced a death of a patient. Today I held his hand and I told him he was strong. This virus had taken over. No more fighting to be done. Today I held his hand and in the other held a phone. His family said, "We love you. It's time to say goodbye." Today I held his hand as I hung up on that phone. The pattern changed, his heart beating no more. Today I held his hand, tears behind my plastic face mask. This protective suit I'm wearing cannot shield humanity. Today I held his hand so he wouldn't be alone. So go ahead, Carla, we'll read the names.
J. Emery Arcangeli, Daniel O. Mitchell, James L. Updike, Daniel H. Byler, Dennis Matthew, Stephen A. Scott, James J. Campitelli, Mackenzie Lynn Abath, Derek G. Torres, Katharina L. Babier, Michael Carl Poirier, Arthur Maurice Hines, Jeffrey Artie Lind, Jeffrey A. Stout, Robert H. Bush, Frankie T. Torsier, Reverend John Thomas Connery, Reuben W. Koblenz, Chief Robert E. White, Cole M. Wood, Tony Allen Horton, Patrick D. Bates.
Thank you, Carla. And now I have some remarks. Dr. Michael Axe is a practicing occupational medicine physician, seeing patients in Syracuse, New York since 1988. And he'll give some thoughts on the pandemic.
As Jeanette said, I was asked to talk about the COVID coronavirus issue, and we've been bombarded by it for the last, I don't know how long, seems like 24/7. A listserv, that occupational listserv related to general occupational health is going crazy with COVID-related stuff, to the point where one of the participants wrote in yesterday, help, I can't keep up. And sometimes it seems like, to me, like just everybody's yelling and has their opinion. And so I'm not sure that I have anything so profound or new to add to this cacophony, but I thought I would make 3 points, three things to say. One is that, over the last couple of weeks or so, and it's getting more intense, are these demonstrations of people who are demanding that the country be opened back up, that they given back their rights to go back to work, to not social distance, to live their lives as they lived them before. And, sort of, I think my first reaction is, what are these people just ignorant, or what's wrong with them? Are they just dumb? And I think that thinking about it a little bit, I think they're sort of divided up into a couple different groups. One part is certainly, I think, politically or philosophically motivated. They're interested in opposing any infringement and what they see on their individual liberties, as well as religious, what they see as their religious liberties, arguing that those trump any public health concerns. But I think that besides that group, there's a lot of people who are out there who are out there just because on a lot more practical basis. They have more practical concerns. because essentially these are people, a lot of people who have lost their jobs or face losing their jobs. They're running up bills. They probably might have been working paycheck to paycheck anyway, don't have much savings, and they're looking at the abyss of financial ruin if they don't somehow get back to work. And so for me, I mean, that highlights what I think one of the things that Greg said before, and that is that, any health problem, especially a public health problem of this magnitude, including workplace health issues, always occurs within a context, a political context, an economic context, a social context. And, I sort of, in thinking about that, just specifically around this, the issue that these folks are raising, I came across an article that was called "Lucky to Live in Berlin," that was written by American guy who's been living in Berlin for a long time and now must have residency or citizenship. And he was describing the difference there in what's going on in Germany, where he was able to, although he lost his job and what he was doing, he was able to access benefits, kept his apartment, was still eating, and really is not living in the same kind of desperation that we see a lot of more here. And I think that speaks to the idea in terms of this being a political and economic crisis, part of which is that some of what's gone on for the past, who knows how long, decades, is that the social safety net that existed in the United States, which is never all that great, has been shredded to the point where it just is almost non-existent or is certainly inadequate for anybody to survive on. So really, I think that's an underlying explanation or impetus for people to be out, one of the big impetuses for people to be out demonstrating. So that's one thing. And then sort of second to that is one of the things that we hear about this disease is that, it can happen to anybody, that, it doesn't have respect for borders, it doesn't have respect for class, anybody can get it. And, we see that people like, Prince Charles or Boris Johnson or NBA stars or Tom Hanks, they all have gotten the coronavirus. So that's true. But the reality is that just like any other disease, as this pandemic progresses, everybody is not really at increased risk of getting the disease, and they're not at increased risk of suffering the worst consequences of the disease, whether those consequences are medical or whether those consequences are economic or non-medical. Because once, and just to give you an example of how this works, there's a city in Ecuador that's called Guayaquil, which is actually the biggest city in Ecuador. And Guayaquil was described has been described as the epicenter of coronavirus infection in Latin America now. And the way that Guayaquil became infected initially, it appears, is that individuals who had been either living or traveling in Europe, mostly in Spain, came back from there in like February or March. There was a story of one woman who they traced who came back. She had been in Spain for quite a while. She started visiting all of her family that she hadn't seen before. She had a cough, she had a fever. She infected 17 people. Three of them died. And so what happened was that, these are sort of more wealthy, well-off people who got the disease first from traveling, from being in places where the disease was prevalent. But once it got to Guayaquil, those who figured it out that this disease was there, the wealthy were able to basically work from home, wall themselves off, isolate themselves, and do what they need to protect themselves as best as possible, while the disease has been rampaging through the rest of the city. And the people who are getting sick and who are dying, many of them not accessing medical care at all, ending up in their apartments for days, dead, on the street, dead. Coffins, not coffins, bodies literally piling up on the streets there, being the government denying that there's probably undercounting by a factor of 3 or 4 how many people have actually died. You know, the people who are dying are not the well-off, they're not the rich. And the same thing is true, you know, pretty much any place you look. And the way things are going on in the United States or progressing in the United States, that same pattern is emerging. That, for example, you know, when they started taking the trouble to look, African Americans, in particular in big cities like New York and Detroit, were the ones most at risk and being sick and dying. And just here graphically, about a month ago or so, before everything got really, all the regulations or recommendations came on, I went to the grocery store, and it was like there were 2 different worlds going on when I went to the grocery store. There were those of us who were shopping, and you know, people at that point were already starting, a number of people wearing masks already, lots of people wearing gloves, you know, people taking lots of different obvious precautions and staying away from each other, etc. And then there were the workers. And the workers were basically working like nothing was going on. You know, they're close to each other, they're talking, they're not wearing masks. There was really, and you get to the cashier, and you know, the cashier was coming in close contact with people, and it just sort of starkly sort of illustrated that divide between people who are able to isolate, to do the social distancing, maybe to work from home, et cetera, and do what's needed for that, and those who are not. So you hear a lot about, you know, essential workers, and essential workers, clearly healthcare workers are workers that are essential, but, you know, we're talking about all kinds of other workers, bus drivers, grocery store workers, other food workers. We heard about, you know, the farm workers, the plumbers who come and respond to your plumbing emergency, the city workers who pick up the garbage, all of whom are continuing to do their jobs throughout the whole, as this crisis progresses. And on the other hand, I think that the way this society sort of generally sees those workers is maybe it pays lip service to, you know, how important teachers and daycare workers and healthcare workers are generally, but they're not necessarily treated that way in terms of their working conditions. And you see it now in terms of who they're called essential, but the protection that they get on the job that they're getting, the preparation that there was for something like this to happen, the availability of just sort of basic personal protective equipment and other kinds of things needed to take precautions on the job isn't there. So yeah, you're essential, but where's the respect and the real work and resources that are necessary to do what you need to do to protect people and to prevent them from getting sick on the job. So, you know, again, it's connected to the whole, I think, idea of this social safety net, who's respected, who's really essential, and what's done to actually protect and prevent disease among those individuals. So that leads me to my last point, and that is that, you know, this pandemic, like all pandemics, it's going to end at some point. It's not going to be necessarily that fast, to maybe a year, maybe even 2 years away, but at some point it's going to end. And the world that emerges from this, from the sort of, when the dust clears on this pandemic, is going to be really different than the world was before the pandemic started. And the question is, you know, what is that world going to look like, and who's going to shape it? And I think that at the end of the economic meltdown in 2008, the same kind of questions were asked. You know, the world changed then, and what was going to happen, and you know, everybody thought that well, you know, we can't let this problem happen again. And then really what happened afterwards was kind of business as usual. That those who were responsible for causing the problems pretty much got away with it and paid off. Those who suffered the consequences were, as usual, the people who were more on the lower rungs of the socioeconomic and class and racial and ethnic ladder. And so now we have another catastrophe that's occurring. And at the same time, catastrophes are always, at the same time, opportunities. So again, what opportunity will we be able to take after this one ends? And I think already you see lots of people giving their opinions about this. This guy, there's Trump's Department of Labor, the guy he nominated originally, Andrew Puzder, he owned Hardee's he ran Hardee's and Carl's fast food business chains. He had an article maybe a week or so ago in the newspaper, advocating that, what we need is more unregulated markets, and we got, Trump really has to be able to go all the way in terms of, allowing business to get back up on its feet without any constraints. That's what we need. That's what's going to save this economy. And, a good argument could be made that that's actually, over the last 40 years, that kind of thinking is what's actually not only destroyed our economy, but destroyed our safety net and has led to the situation that we're in now, where we have a country which is supposed to be the greatest country in the world, that cannot even produce enough masks for people to wear on the job to be protected from this virus as they work in healthcare or any other place. So as an alternative to that, I think that we need to think about a different path forward, and not only think about a different path forward, but also to figure out, okay, how are we going to participate in creating that path forward? And, I think what Greg said before in terms of us all being in this together, and other people, Jessica mentioned before too, the idea of an injury for all, to one is an injury to all, and this issue, the idea of solidarity, again, that's fundamental to anything that's going to happen in the future in terms of going someplace that we want it to go, as opposed to just back to business as usual. And so again, a lot of people are putting forward ideas about this. I would refer you to our own local activist, Andy Major, who's a long-time peace council activist, as well as other areas. He had a nice article in the Post Standard that he published, or they published a couple days ago on Sunday. And some of the things that he talked about were things like universal health care, not tied to employment, paid sick leave, personal time and vacation, major investments in the public healthcare system, decarceration, addressing systemic racism, rebuilding neighborhoods and communities to increase resiliency, revitalizing democratic structures. So those are some of the ideas I think that we can talk about and debate. But I think the important thing is that we all need to be in on this conversation and in on the struggle, because even though on the one hand this system seems so, before this COVID epidemic, it seems so strong, so formidable, that the powers to be that were in place are just like pretty much impregnable and unbeatable. But what COVID shows is, one of the things that COVID shows is that this system is incredibly fragile, and that we have the power, actually, if we can figure out where to put the pressure, to actually change this system in a way that probably wasn't, at least in my mind, wasn't conceivable, seemed more like just sort of pie in the sky before this COVID pandemic. So I'd finish with just a quote from another article that I found the other day. This is from a guy named Alfredo Saad Filho, who's a Brazilian historian or political scientist. And what he said was that I am cautiously optimistic that capitalism cannot wash this stain. It is now time to imagine what kind of society can serve the majority and to avoid the repetition of the disgraceful outcomes that we are experiencing. Instead of the crimes and inefficiencies of neoliberalism, we need progressive taxation, the expansion of public services with built-in spare capacity for emergencies, and a society based on solidarity, human values, and respect for nature. So I think that the slogan for Workers' Memorial Day is mourn for the dead and fight for the living, and I think that gives us an idea of what the content of that actual slogan might be in the coming future. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for suggesting a way forward and having us imagine a society that can serve the majority for solidarity, human values, and respect for nature. So everyone check out the chat over there. There's some credits that didn't get in somewhere in there. Really appreciate your time. We had a feeling we'd go over. So we appreciate everyone patience with us on this, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much, everyone. I think it's, we'll call it adjourned.